Hello and welcome to this week's Sunday sit-down video where I talk about a topic more casually. And this week I'm actually going to try to talk about 9 different games that I've played that have been on my list of games to talk about in my favorite mechanism videos that I do on Tuesday and Friday. But I keep playing, I don't know, these are all good games, but I couldn't find enough meat in the mechanism that I want to talk about for each of them to justify a full video. So I figured, I've done this once before, I'll pack them all into one little video and talk about each one quickly. So the first one, some of these I own, some of these I don't. The first one is Decrypto. Decrypto is a team game where you are trying to essentially decipher codes. And it reminds me a little bit of Fake Artist Goes to New York, where you are publicly just out loud saying information, but you're trying to say it in such a way that a certain person, or in the case of Decrypto, an entire team of people, do not guess what you're saying. And I really, really like this mechanism in general. When you are trying to convey specific information to your team or whoever you're working with, but you have to provide that information out loud in such a way that it doesn't give everything away to the opposing team. And I really like the way that Decrypto does that. I like the way Fake Artist does that. I like the way Spyfall does that. I think that's just a cool mechanism in general for these social bluffing deduction games. The second game I want to talk about is Monster Crunch. Monster Crunch is by the same folks who make the Bob Ross Art of Chill game. Monster Crunch is much lighter. It's a kind of a trick-taking game themed about cereal. And it has one little specific thing. It's actually been a while since I played, so I'm probably going to completely misstate this. But you're trying to play, I believe you're trying to play a higher number than the previous player to stay in the round. You're trying to stay in the round longer than anyone else. And they added just a clever little thing, not enough for a full video, but just a clever little thing where there are these milk cards that you can use, or milk tokens that you can use to combine 2 cards together. So if I have a 7 and a 3, I can use a milk token to combine that into a 10. It's just a clever touch in a game that gives you a little bit of agency in a game that's otherwise pretty random because you're just using the cards that were randomly given to you. You do have a choice as to when you play those cards, but the milk tokens give you more agency over exactly when you decide to try to jump ahead of the other players based on the information you know about them, in the hopes that no one else will be able to play a higher number than the one that you just combined to make. That's Monster Crunch. Also, as usual, I know I'm talking about a lot of games today. I will list all the names of these games in the description below in case you want to look up more information about these games. I know I don't have a lot of visuals today. I only own 3 of these games. The next one is Freedom, the Underground Railroad. I probably should have done a full video about this, but it's been a few months since I played it. And there are a couple really cool things in this game. One of them is the spatial puzzle that reminded me a little bit of Burgle Brothers, which is it's a game about trying to help slaves escape from the South in a very terrible time of U.S. history. And as you are moving these slaves that you're trying to free, you are also kind of triggering these patrols that are trying to prevent the slaves from escaping to the north. And there's some really interesting spatial manipulation here because you might, even saying this out loud sounds very weird because this is such a sensitive topic, but in the game they are cubes. You're moving cubes around. And so as you're moving some of the cubes from the south to the north, you might try to time them so that you shift over a patrol to get out of the way of another cube that you want to move up really, really fast. So I like that spatial puzzle. The other thing that I like about Freedom that I wish was in more cooperative games is that there is a die roll that you associate with bad things. That you have to do this die roll. I can't remember how often you do it, but you do it fairly often, and you associate it with bad things. A lot of cooperative games have like a bad thing die or bad thing draw, but there are, I think, at least 1 or 2 good faces on this die. So even though it's associated with bad stuff happening, every now and then a very good thing can happen, which kind of keeps hope alive in the game, which fits this particular theme really well. So I really like it when cooperative games have, even when you have something that's associated with a negative, that there is a glimmer of hope that something positive will happen instead. That's Freedom, the Underground Railroad. The next game is Port Royal. from Alexander Pfister, one of my favorite designers. And it's one of these push your luck games. Like the other day, I talked about Ink and Gold on my channel. And Port Royal is somewhat similar in that on your turn, you are revealing cards in a card row until you either decide to stop or until you bust, and then all those cards go away. And the thing that I really like here is when you're creating this row of cards, you get the first pick. When you decide to stop, you get the first pick of which card to take. But then the other players around the table, starting with the player to your left, I believe, maybe right, you can look up a rules video, they also get to take cards. So you are putting cards out there that other players can take, so other players are engaged even when it's your turn. But this gives you a huge reason to try to get enough cards equal to the number of players plus 1. Because if there are, say, 3 players at the table, and I manage to get 4 cards out there, if I'm pushing my luck enough to get 4 cards out there, then it means that when it gets back to me, I get to take another card. Because I take the first one, then the next player, then there's a card left over, I get to take that card. So I like that there is a reason to not just stop early, and to keep going until you have enough cards that you can actually get an extra card, maybe even another card if you go around the circle one entire other time. So I like that push your luck element that actually involves other players in the equation. That's Port Royal by Alexander Pfister. The next game, I'll show you another one that I actually have, is the Hare and the Tortoise. It's one of these games that looks like books. I love that idea. And this is a game, I guess a little bit similar to Downforce or Camel Cup, where you are controlling, where you are manipulating characters that are part of a race, but you don't represent one of those characters, or those characters don't represent you. Rather, you are betting on different characters to hopefully finish the race first. Throughout, you make that selection at the beginning of the race. But the cool thing here, the really nice twist here, that I think differentiates a little bit from Camel Cup and Downforce. In Downforce, you actually do have your own car, so that is a little different. This is more like Camel Cup. In the Hare and the Tortoise, each creature has their own little asymmetry in terms of how they move based on the cards that players are playing to make that character move. So on your turn, you're playing a few different cards up until into the middle of the table, and nothing happens yet. And when a certain critical mass of cards has gathered in the middle of the table, that's when you move certain characters. And depending on the cards that are there, the characters move in different ways. So I really like this element of having characters that don't represent players, that have asymmetrical abilities based on what all players are contributing to the common pool. That's really cool, because it gives you a little bit more agency than normal, actually, and you lose some too, because you might, like I might be rooting for the Hare, and the Hare wants a certain specific number of cards to be played for the Hare on the table. But if the player to my left or my right, say, doesn't have the Hare, they might try to play cards outside of that range. They might actually play extra Hare cards, so the Hare doesn't move as well as they should, because that range can depend on that specific character. So other players can manipulate each of the characters that are moving to their benefit or to their detriment. That is the Hare and the Tortoise. Then I'll skip to the last one is another game I had. Let's see, I'll do Prehistory next. Prehistory is a game, it's a Euro game with a lot of different mechanisms mixed into the game. But the thing I like about it is it has a lot of mini games and kind of puzzly little abstract mini games that mean different things in the context of the game. But the resources that you spend to participate in these mini games are common throughout. So I might be spending my red cubes for this one little mini game, but those red cubes could be used in other ways instead. If I had used that for a different mini game, they'd be used in a different way. Or if I had saved them to the end of the round, they might be used in a different way, or save them to the next round. So I like that there are all these separate mini games that you're playing. I won't go into how they work, but look up a video about Prehistory, because there's some pretty cool mini games that you're playing. And you can't focus on all of them. There are too many for you to focus on all of them. But you can dabble in each of them and try to master maybe one of them. But I like that you have a common pool of resources that you're using in a lot of different ways throughout a broad number of mini games. That's Prehistory. Ravine, I don't have Ravine either. Ravine is a game that, it's a cooperative game that I played a few weeks ago with some friends. And it's a cooperative kind of survival game. There's a nice narrative to it. And it has two little things that I really liked about it. One is the main resources that you're spending in the game are cards. So you're trying to get more cards so you have more options. And you can use those cards for yourself or use them to benefit the other players. And at the beginning of each round, you decide how much of your health you want to spend to draw cards. I think at its core, you draw one card. But if you spend 1 health, you get to draw 2 cards. 3 health, you get to draw... Well, 1 health, you can draw 2 cards. 2 health, you get to draw 3 cards. So it gives you +1 card. And so since you want cards, you're trying to decide, okay, how much health do I want to spend to help me with these cards? And a lot of the cards might give you health. And so you don't want that to go wasted either. You don't want to have a card that gives you health and just have no place to spend that health, no place to gain that health. But if you go too low on health, you go crazy. I think that's the term used in the game. I think you just go crazy. I think you can die if you lose too much health. So there's this really nice decision before you even know what's on the cards as to how much health you want to spend to draw cards. And then the flip side of this is how you spend those cards to gain health during the round. This is one of those games where it can actually be a little fun to go a little crazy. That's where some of the stories emerge from the game. Because you get these new, if you go crazy, you get these new traits that make you act a little weird in the game. And so I like that players had that choice. They basically had the choice to decide how much health they're going to gain during the round based on the available health cards that other players have or that they have. And so if you feel like being a little chaotic or mixing things up a little bit, you can essentially choose to go crazy in this game. The game doesn't decide that for you, maybe 50% of the time. Sometimes it just happens. But I like that you have that choice to add a chaotic element to a cooperative game where the game isn't forcing that upon you necessarily. You are choosing that for yourself and for the other players. That's Ravine. The final game is Startups. This is a nice little game from, what is the game? Oink Games. Yeah, Oink Games makes these little games. And this is actually a similar game to the Hare and the Tortoise where you are not like there are all these different startup companies on the table and you are essentially buying stock in them or getting control of them. But at the beginning of the game, you don't control any of them. You aren't inherently tied to any of these different startups. And you are accumulating cards throughout the game. Or I can actually show you since I have the game. You're accumulating these cards and deciding when you want to use them to gain control of the different startups. So if I have this card, this is Octo Coffee. If I decide to use a couple of these cards, say, I have a bunch of them here. Say I have all 4 of these. Say someone else already controls Octo Coffee. They have 3 Octo Coffee cards out on the table. And I decide... I already have 2 on the table. I decide to play, I believe you can only play 1 card of your turn, but say I have 3 on the table. I decide to play another to get me up to 4. I then gain control of Octo Coffee. And that is important at the end of the game because it's worth points based on how many other players control shares in Octo Coffee but don't actually control the company. So at the end of the game, if that player who had control of it, they have 3 of these cards out there, they have to give me 3 coin tokens that essentially they multiply by 3. So I end up, I know this is very convoluted. The core idea is I am trying to control companies at the end of the game that other players have face-up cards for, which itself is a cool mechanism. But my favorite thing about this game is that you must play all of your cards. So based on what I just said, there's a good reason for you to have cards if you are going to control those companies. But if you don't actually control them at the end of the game, it's a bad thing. You don't actually want to have these cards on the table. And so that's where the game pushes you a little bit. It says, okay, you have to play all the cards. And so you may not actually want to play all of them because you might end up paying money to the player who does actually control it at the end of the game. But my favorite thing about that is that at the end of the game, there's a big reveal. You have 3 cards in your hand at the end of the game, and you have to reveal all of them. You have to, all at one time, you put them down on the table. And this reveal is very dramatic because it can end up really changing the position of the control of these different startups right at the end of the game. So there's this big reveal at the end of the game. Most games I don't think end with this level of climax, especially tiny little games like this. But this one is huge. It's really, really fun to cull your hand and manage your hand over the course of the game so that end reveal can be to your benefit as much as possible. I've really enjoyed that element of startups. All right, that's 9 games. I was aiming for 9 minutes, but I went a little over here. Yeah, those are some cool mechanisms in these 9 games. If you have, actually no, I missed one. I'm sorry, I missed Codenames Duet. I'm looking at my list here. Codenames Duet. I actually did struggle to find a mechanism for this because it's so similar to Codenames, which is brilliant. Codenames Duet makes it cooperative, so you're playing Codenames but cooperatively. And the thing that I wrote down that I want to talk about was that that there's some overlapping spaces between the two players. So there are certain cards that you do want to say, like certain words that you're trying to get the other person to figure out. But some of them are in this cooperative game are shared, so you're actually sharing them with other players. So ideally, you wouldn't have that overlap. Like you would only solve each word once, but because you have that overlap, it just changes the puzzle a little bit. I don't know. I don't know what to say about Codenames Duet. It was just a really clever cooperative version of Codenames, and I'm impressed how they pulled it off, how they made a competitive team game a fully cooperative game where you're actually trying to help each other and get each other to guess these clues. And I think there are little touches like the timer in the game or the shared spaces that added to that cooperative element. So if you have any favorite mechanisms that I have brushed over, not talked about at all, of any of these 9 games, I'd love to hear about them in the comments. And I think next week I'm going to do my top 10 games of 2018. Either that or I'll wait till the following week. But I don't think I'm going to play any games in 2018 after next week, any new games. So I think that'll be a good time to do the video. Yeah, thanks for joining me, and I will see you on Tuesday for a new My Favorite Game Mechanism video. Take care.